been a while, but welcome back into the Top Prospects podcast. Logan Barandis joined alongside Chris Lemo, and it's been a while since we've done one of these episodes. I don't think we've done it for the entire MLB season, as I'm still in state college. Chris is no longer in the state, so things have definitely changed. But one team of ours is in the World Series, the other one is not. So, Chris, I know you have the positive vibe. How you doing today?
Well, all right. So first off, a lot to unpack here. Obviously, Logan here being my successor back in State College. Miss him very much. Miss Penn State Sports Night very much. Great to be kind of the Jeremy Gaines special guest here back last year when he came back on. I think, I feel like we did some stuff back at the very beginning of the season. Probably had some predictions. We probably had some Mets World Series predictions in there. And it's the Phillies. Like, I say this with a question mark because I'm just like, I still haven't comprehended the last couple of weeks. Like 3 weeks ago, we got beat, like 12-3, 12-4 in Washington. And if the Milwaukee Brewers, who I believe a certain podcast member tweeted out that this was a Milwaukee Brewers Twitter account now. Couldn't be me. Back in like June, if the Milwaukee Brewers weren't completely just incompetent down the stretch, like they should have been in this playoffs. Like the Phillies probably shouldn't have been the one. They didn't play like they deserved it down the stretch. And they come in here and go on this run. And I mean, Harper has been on one of the all-time great stretches. I mean, definitely in the NLCS. I mean, he's just been unbelievable. I mean, he looked dead coming back from injury after, the All-Star, well, not even after the All-Star break in September. Looked horrible when he came back. And I thought, this team is going to go as far as Bryce Harper is going to carry them. And he's carried them.
He really has. And I mean, there's been a lot of luck when it comes to just the Phillies run so far. I mean, you talk about the Brewers kind of fading out down the stretch, but also the addition of that third wild card spot, which the Phillies got and used to kind of go all the way to this point. And there were a lot of Phillies fans that wanted that wild card spot specifically to avoid the Mets, who they haven't beaten really all year. There's some pretty bad losses down that little rivalry as well. And then the Padres, who they eventually got and eventually beat. But it's been quite the run, to say the least. I know you've been at some of the games also.
Yeah. Well, first of all, so I went down to St. Louis for game 2. I flew out of Green Bay here, went down to St. Louis. That was a lot of fun. That was a pitcher's duel. It was, I mean, Nola was electric that night. And that whole series was probably the most on edge that I've been watching a sporting event since the Super Bowl, I think, for the Eagles. I mean, it was just like edge of your seat. I remember in the ninth inning too, game 2 against St. Louis, it looked like they were going to blow it. I mean, they gave up a hit to, I think it was Yachty that got a hit. Cause I remember I recorded it on my phone. He got a hit and the guy after him got a hit. So I was like, okay, I'm going to stop recording the 2 outs here and let him clinch without filming it. And from there on, it just kind of snowballed. Like that was the worst series I thought that they played was in St. Louis. In Atlanta, they played a great series against Atlanta. I mean, arguably had the Hoskins error not happened, they could have swept Atlanta. I mean, they were in that game until 7th or 8th or whenever Hoskins committed that error. They win that series 3-1. But that game was incredible. And then the game 4 game, so this past Saturday that I was at, was I went in 08 to one of the NLCS games against the Dodgers where they won. It was incredible. I don't know if you've had the chance to go to a Mets playoff game, but when I tell you the stadium, you could feel the ground like shaking, and they go down 4-0, come back to make it 4-3 in that first inning. And the place was electric. I mean, when Hoskins hit that game tying homer, I lost it. I'm pretty sure I blacked out. Like I don't remember jumping up and down, just screaming and high-fiving everybody around. And it's just, playoff baseball is just so different. Like it's what the city has been missing for a decade. And I know, New York had, what was it, 4 or 5 seasons, maybe more without the playoffs. But when you end that kind of a drought, it's just a different feeling. Like you don't, like the Dodgers, for example, or Houston. I don't see how those fans, I mean, yes, it's exciting when they get to the playoffs, but when you go on a run like this and break a drought, like look at Seattle, for example. I know they didn't go anywhere, but when you have something like that, it's just the entire city gets up for it, and it's just a different feeling.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of talk about just Philly ending a long drought. I think the Mets had kind of about half as long as the drought that the Phillies had because they last made it in 2016. Now, granted, that was just a one-game wild card game, which your boy Noah Syndergaard started that game and actually played really well. And even in 2022, this year, they played 3 games at Citi Field. And you talk about the Mariners and the run that they kind of went on. It's sad because they made it to the second round of the playoffs, and yet they only had one game in Seattle, which was the game they got eliminated in. That I think it was an 18-inning game. It was against the Astros, and it was sad because they were up pretty much every game in that series, and it could easily be a different result. Instead, the Astros ended up sweeping them, and that was that. But yeah, I mean, you talk about just kind of the runs that have been ended so far in these playoffs. The Phillies had the big one, obviously, and the Mets just could not follow in that same stretch, putting up arguably one of the best regular seasons they've had in quite some time. I think the second best in their history. And the Padres are just the wrong team to play at the wrong time.
Yeah, I mean, admittedly, I didn't see that coming because, again, in the postseason, pitching is king, and you look at that Mets roster, and it's Scherzer and DeGrom. I mean, you look at what the Phillies have done; they basically have used, for the most part, they've relied on Wheeler and Nola. I mean, and the Mets, Scherzer and DeGrom should not have been beaten by anybody, really. I mean, even if you add in whoever you choose as your third, Bassett or whoever, I'm not sure how much the Mets can really improve upon that next year because, I mean, obviously, yeah, they could lose DeGrom, which is a whole other discussion to go into, but there's not really an upgrade over Scherzer and DeGrom. It's just the luck of the draw in a best of 3 wild card series. The lineup didn't hit enough homers during the regular season, in my opinion, I guess you could say. Although, again, I was of the mindset during the regular season, honestly, that I would have traded that kind of a contact lineup for the all or nothing lineup that the Phillies had. Although there's been some stats that the team that out homers typically in the postseason always wins the series. I'd have to look up the actual stat, but I mean, you look at teams like the Braves, Dodgers, Astros, they've bashed their way to World Series, obviously. So that maybe that is what they do. I mean, who knows? They'll probably go after Judge or something, knowing Steve Cohen. But yeah, I mean, the thing about the Mariners, though, that is horrible. I mean, an 18-inning loss. They don't even score in their first home playoff game in, what was it, 21 years. I mean, I did legitimately. I mean, you have to feel for those fans. I mean, that was really, I think that was probably the biggest disappointment of the postseason.
Yeah, I think if you get one playoff game of any caliber for, especially with Mariners fans have kind of gone through in the past, because they've had some winning seasons in that 21-year stretch, especially when guys like Felix Hernandez, even Robbie Cano, when they were there leading that team, they had some high 80s, maybe even low 90 win teams, especially the year before they made the playoffs. I think any kind of run they made was still good. And they had a battle through that Toronto series. So it's not even like the one playoff series where they actually did win was close for fans to travel to. They kind of were waiting on either the Houston games or just that one game in Seattle, but it was still a fun run. And that team, they still have a really bright future. I mean, Julio Rodriguez is going to be really good for a long time, and we'll see just kind of how they build around him. And you kind of talked about the Mets briefly a little bit. I think the main thing with this run, the second they lost that Braves series, which was a crucial one for the Mets to win, they had to win at least one game to be in a big spot, and they got swept. The second they got swept in that series, they lost the season. Because you take a look at the new rules for this year, even though the Mets and Braves finished with the same record, they couldn't play in a tiebreaker for a one-game tiebreaker for the division. So the Braves, they had won that series by one game, overall season series 10-9. The Braves were put in this great spot to play the Phillies, which they should have taken advantage of, and they didn't. And the Mets were sliding. They'd been kind of sliding for the second half, but they were still putting up some pretty good numbers in the win-loss record. And they just ran into a tough Padres team. I mean, that Padres team was built for the postseason. I mean, you talk about the Mets starting pitching, like that's built for the postseason too, but the Padres were just a different animal, and they played really well in that series, regardless of what was going on with Joe Musgrove's ear and the stuff like that went on in game 3. But the Mets played really competitive, and they were in all 3 games. That lineup, it's an experienced team. They haven't been in the postseason in a while, but the Mets, maybe they could have mixed up the rotation a little bit. Maybe DeGrom could have started game 1 instead of Scherzer because he had some kind of injury issue in that series. But we could have very well be looking at Jacob DeGrom starting game 2 as his last start as a Met, because you take a look at the free agents that the Mets are going to have to re-sign this offseason. DeGrom's one, Edwin Diaz is one, Brandon Nimmo. There's a lot of guys out there. And then the free agent class overall as a whole is such a big one, and Steve Cohen's going to want to get at least one of those guys, whether it is a Judge, a Trey Turner, just one of those big guys out there, even Shohei Ohtani, like on the trade block. So there's a lot up to play here with this Mets team, and this is probably the one shot you're going to get with this core, because this Mets team that played and won 101 games this year, it's going to look completely different next year, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I definitely do want to get into that, but I do have a question here, because this was something that I'd heard talked about, and I think it's a good point. None of the other, at least that I can think of, divisional races came down to the last couple games of the season like the Braves Mets. Do you think that that whole month or two of just day in, day out, constantly battling for that top spot and knowing that it was going to come down to that series, do you think that kind of just gassed both of those teams just in that absolute fight to the finish to get that division crown? I'm not saying that that's why the Braves lost. I'm not saying that's why the Mets lost. I do think that may have played a role, that, for a lot of that took a lot of energy for every game for 2 months, battling for that division title and looking over your shoulder and seeing how well the Braves were playing. Do you think that had an impact?
I think it could have. And I think to your point, like it showed in the playoffs just how tired those teams were. And that's pretty much all you heard on just MLB social media and the social media from both those teams. Just every time the Mets win, you had to look at the scoreboard while that game was going on, which is how the Braves were doing. And the Braves just didn't stop winning in the months of August and September. And that probably does take a toll on this Mets team, because you walk into the clubhouse every day and that's all you're being asked about is not just how well you're playing, because the Mets were playing pretty good during that stretch, but just that the Braves were playing even better. And the Braves just had to win night in and night out just to stay in that conversation. So I think it definitely does make a lot of sense what you're saying. And the Phillies were kind of just locked into that spot. They were okay with being the third wild card spot because they're just happy to be there. But the Mets and Braves just had so many expectations, especially kind of at the All-Star break, because they were both doing so well. And it could have definitely taken a toll, because the Mets were pretty much knocked out of the playoffs right away. And the Braves, they did have some time to rest and kind of recoup, but the damage may have already been done. And the Phillies were just red hot. I mean, it's red hot October, for God's sake. Like that probably played a big role in why the Braves got knocked out. But I definitely see your point. And mindset is probably a big part in just those two teams' downfall and why the Phillies are in the World Series right now.
Yeah, and I do think so. Looking back to that wild card series for the Phillies, And the comparison that I make with them is the 2019, it was 2019, the Nationals. And I know the Nationals came back. Did they win that division? No, they didn't, because they went to the wild card. I don't remember how many wins. That Nats team definitely had more wins, though, I think. But if you look at the record, the Nats started, I believe, 18-31, because it's actually engraved on their rings, from what I remember. And the Phillies under Girardi started, oh gosh, I should know this number by now, but it's got to be, they were like 7 or 8 games under. It was very similar. They were 22-29. Nats were 18-31. Similar start. For the Phillies, new manager comes in. They go on this run. Rob Thompson was like 19 games over 500 in his stint. And they both catch, now obviously there's a new format, but they both catch a huge break in their wild card game. In the wild card game for the Nats, Soto, I think they're behind I think it's the bottom of the 8th. They're down a run, first and second. Soto hits a liner into right field, goes under the glove of Grisham. They take the lead. Soto ends up at third base. And from then on, that team was like unstoppable. The Phillies, game 1, they could not hit the ball to save their life. I mean, I said game's over. Hopefully Nola gets this one game too. We'll see where we go from there. And they're down 2-0. All of a sudden, I mean, look, it was Nolan Arenado makes an error. Nolan Arenado, who is, in my opinion, the best defensive player in baseball, I think. Okay. And he looks bad in the 9th inning. A bunch of errors and like oddly, softly hit balls in the right spot. They catch a bunch of breaks in that game, score 6 runs, go on to win. Since then, they've looked unstoppable. So it seems like in those kind of years, if there's a wild card team that's going to make a run, you just kind of know it right away. Like you kind of have that team of destiny vibe. And I don't think that that's something you can count out.
Yeah, and those runs have looked really similar kind of to the points that you made. And I think it's been more impressive from the Phillies standpoint, not because the Nationals run was any easier, but with the lockout that happened kind of at the start of the season, which didn't end until maybe a month or two before the season started, there haven't been a lot of off days, and you had to play kind of game after game after game, whether it's kind of in Philly one day and in Atlanta the next. Like that's been a factor too. And the fact that the Phillies have been able to win these games despite the thin rotation, like you mentioned before, like there's been a game where you had to start Noah Syndergaard like for 3 innings to clinch a series against the Braves. Like they've had to manage through a lot, and they've done exactly that. So I think there's a lot more to be considered about in this Phillies run than the Nationals run that year.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is that Nats year, now the wheels have fallen off for a lot of those players, but they had Strasburg before his arm fell off, Corbin before he forgot how to pitch, and Scherzer, who's, still Max Scherzer. But they were able to use those 3 guys constantly in the postseason. And you look at it, kind of alluding to your point, there's been fewer off days this postseason. Like if the Phillies lose that game 5, they have to fly out to San Diego on no rest. So you can't always use your top 3 guys. Whereas, in the Nats postseason, when they won it, they could just cycle through Strasburg, Corbin, Scherzer over and over. And that's effectively what they did. They leaned on those guys for 7 innings, went to Doolittle and whoever, Tanner Rainey or whoever, they had there out of the back end of that bullpen. But overall, a pretty similar look. But the 2019 Nationals beat the Astros. The 2021 Atlanta Braves beat the Astros. As much as I would love to sit here and say, and, look, I know probably 99%, well, I would say 90%. There's a lot of people in Philadelphia that are probably negative / maybe don't believe 100% that they can beat the Astros. I'm part of that 10% that, look, it's an amazing run. We'll get to hang a banner and remember this run as one of the all-time great Philadelphia sports runs that has happened. Get to hang an NL pennant banner. It's amazing. For me, if they win the World Series, yeah, that's awesome. I think this Astros team might be one of the best. one of the best teams to do it. I know that the Dodgers had 111 wins or whatever, but this Astros team is just insane.
So two things to kind of add on to that. One, thanks for stealing my cool transition going from the NL to the AL. And two, the second that the Mets hang that NL wildcard participant banner, you're not invited because, you say the Phillies are a team that gets to hang a banner. The Mets could be right there with you. And you take a look at this Astros run, and yeah, it's been really good. They have been dominant year after year after year, despite losing so many guys from that 2017 championship team. They've lost Springer, Correa being last year, and they only replace him with now the ALCS MVP and Jeremy Pena, and they've just looked exactly the same. They haven't lost a game yet in these playoffs, and Justin Verlander came back after years of injuries and looks like he could be the AL Cy Young Award winner. This team just happens to be unstoppable, and they've played some really good teams as well. We talk about that Seattle Mariners team looking like a really good team heading into that series, and they were on such a high of beating the Blue Jays in that comeback fashion that they did. And the Astros were down pretty much every game in that series, and yet they've battled through adversity. Yordan Alvarez looked like a beast in that series, and they got to the ALCS, where all those Yankee fans that wanted Houston in that series got Houston. They swept them, and a lot of those games were close, but it takes a veteran-led and a championship caliber team to power through and get those wins. And the Phillies, they dominated pretty much all their games. The Astros, it maybe wasn't as easy for them, and they got to this spot. And it should be a really fun matchup with these two teams. And really the question is which team flames out first, because whatever team manages to persevere is probably going to be raising up that World Series trophy at the end of it.
Yeah, I think my thinking is if the Phillies take one of those two games in Houston, they have a legit shot, because I said the same thing for every series. Take one of two, or was it three? No, it was the first two were in Atlanta. So one of two in Atlanta. And I said, you got to take one of two in San Diego, and they should have probably taken two games, but then they choked away game two in San Diego. But that's the key. And I think they're going to have to beat Verlander. Verlander has been, over his career at least, not as great in the playoffs as he's been in the regular season. I mean, if you look back over the past couple of years, I mean, the past two playoff runs, I mean, this one has not been that great because he got blown up in one start. I think it was the Seattle one. 2019, 4.33 ERA and 6 starts was okay. 2018, 4.15 ERA and a couple starts, okay. So he's been a good pitcher in the postseason, but not nearly as good as he is in the regular season. Framber's been very good. I mean, look, on paper, it's a better team. It's a better team, but sometimes the better team on paper doesn't always win. I mean, look, San Diego, I don't think was better than the Mets on paper. Definitely San Diego is not better than the Dodgers on paper. I would say the Braves were better than the Phillies on paper. So, the postseason, it tends not to matter. But before I go into a little bit more to the Astros-Phillies matchup, I do want to ask, because of course there's been a lot of people going, wow, the Phillies shouldn't even be in the playoffs, and the whole, the postseason shouldn't have expanded. And I'm sure we talked about this back when it happened. What are your thoughts now on the expanded postseason and the format, if you think it should be modified?
I think it's still a good modification. I mean, you take a look at the 3 division winners in each league, there's always going to be that one that doesn't belong with the other 3. I mean, we saw it with the Cardinals compared to the Braves and the Dodgers. They really didn't stack up as the powerhouses of the NL they really should have been. And the Guardians weren't the AL Central leaders till really late on, and that was a terrible division to begin with because there's a lot of disappointing teams on that end. I mean, the White Sox are supposed to win that series. Even the Detroit Tigers maybe could even be a contender, but they were probably the worst team in all of baseball. And you're comparing that to the Yankees and Astros, who they've been really good from start to finish, and they deserve to have that bye. I think it made a lot of sense, and you can add a playoff team in there. And there have been a lot of really good teams to miss out on October baseball that should have maybe gotten in. And we see it this year with the Phillies just kind of taking advantage of that and being that sixth spot. I mean, you could change it up by giving that third seed a little bit more power, maybe to pick which team they want to play. I mean, that could be one modification, but I think it's still I still think it's a positive change overall.
I think that would be really interesting, like a selection show where you get to pick, and that would create a bit of kind of a rivalry there too between the teams that play. I think that's been floated before, and I think that would be a really cool modification. But if you look at like the 6 teams in each league, it's fewer than the NHL with 8 in both conference, fewer than the NFL obviously expanded to 7 in both, and way fewer than the NBA, which now with the play-in, it's like everybody makes it, it feels like. So in my mind, it's still the hardest playoff to make it to. So I don't think it devalues it at all. And then there's people that are like, wow, it's clearly flawed because, a team like the Phillies shouldn't be able to make it this far. And it's like, well, guess what? The Dodgers could have won games. I mean, it's like, just win the game then. Like, I don't know what else to say. I mean, we've had wild card teams do it before. I mean, the Cardinals have won it a couple times with like mid-80s wins. Trying to think there's been a bunch of other wild card teams. Oh, the San Francisco Giants. That's the prime example too. So it's like, I don't know. I don't think that it matters all that much. I mean, in terms of the amount of wins that a team has. I mean, yes, the 2015 Mets went to the World Series and they did win that division, but they had 90 wins. So it's 3 more than the Phillies had. Personally, I don't think that the division win matters as much as people think it does. It's just, you got to get into the dance. It's like March Madness. I mean, if the best team won, people are like, well, we're not seeing the best teams play each other. What are we doing here? It's like in March Madness or in any other sport, how often is it that you get the 2 1 seeds playing each other? And if you do, quite honestly, I think it's boring. I mean, the upsets make it fun. So for all it's been a lot of Braves fans that have been the salty ones out there. Just stop. Like, what's the point of watching a sport if it's just, oh, well, the 2 best teams should be playing? Well, then what's the point? Then just take the 2 best records just take the best record in the NL, best record in the AL, and have the World Series if that's what you want. Like we did it 50 years ago. Like, I don't know. I think it's a stupid argument. And quite frankly, I think it would make sports quite boring.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And I think March Madness is a great example because when do fans get the most excited? It's not when a 1 seed and a 1 seed play each other. It's when that 16 seed comes out of nowhere and upsets the 1 seed and goes on this great run. That's what gets fans on the couch to the television and to watch the game. Like that's what excites fans. And you have this matchup here, the Astros and the Phillies, David versus Goliath, the 1 seed versus the last team in. Like that's going to be the storyline right there. Like that's the story that gets people to watch the game. I mean, yeah, you could have Astros versus Dodgers, but that's been done before. Like those are the 2 teams that already won a World Series. Like those are teams that have been there, and you have that excitement with the Phillies being in. And I think it'll still be a really fun series, even if it is a swift even if it is a swift exit by the Phillies themselves. Like I think it'll still be a fun watch nonetheless.
Yeah. And, I think back to like back when, when it was LeBron and the Clippers, versus the Lakers for those years, or not the Lakers, the Warriors. And when it was the Cavs Warriors, it was, I felt like we had that. How many years in a row did we have that? Was it?
I think it was 4.
Was it 4? Okay. Because I remember even like SNL did a skit about it. And it was like 30 years from now, you're going to have like robot LeBron and his son come back and play the Warriors. It's like, I don't know. Like, yes, I guess that can be exciting the first couple times, but it's like, I'm sorry, but I don't think people want to see Dodgers Astros. Like, I just think it's not good for the sport to constantly have the same teams in. Like, yes, dynasties are cool, but at the same time, if it's the same 2 teams that are always in it, then it gets to be a problem. Like least with the Patriots, it wasn't always Patriots versus someone. It was versus a new team, which made it interesting. Everybody got to root against the Patriots. When it's the same two teams all the time, it just gets boring. But I do think that it's better for the sport. Thank God the Astros moved out of the NL. I mean, it's actually funny that like a couple of my friends were talking about this, but who would have thought that years ago, back when the Astros were bad, that a random move from the NL Central to the AL West would ruin the lives of Yankee fans everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, that's a dynasty that could have been in the making in the 2010s because they made it a few times to the ALCS. And there were a lot of times that the Astros knocked them out themselves. And it was always kind of a weird thing. I think that was back in like 2013 when they moved because like there was always that weird point where the AL West just had four teams in. Like I think that was even back in like the early 2000s. And then you had whatever division they were in the NL have six teams. Like just kind of common sense. They just never did it until 2013. But yeah, who knew it would just be the Astros moving over there that would just ruin Yankee fans' lives forever and may have ended Aaron Judge's career in New York. You really never know.
Yeah. I mean, it's it's going to be interesting to see how I'm excited to see how Philly fans treat the Astros when they come. Because I mean, personally, not being in the AL, I mean, yes, the cheating scandal, they got a slap on the wrist for sure. But obviously Yankees fans still harbor that huge rivalry and all. And so it'll be interesting to see how Phillies fans put their own kind of spin on that. But getting to that series now, I want to hear your predictions because I really, there's part of me that's like, I've bet against the Phillies this entire run, except for the wild card series. I kind of felt like they would beat the Cardinals, but I bet against them in the Braves series, definitely bet against them in the Padres series. So I feel like I got to bet against them now, but I don't know. I don't want to be a homer, but let me hear you.
Yeah, I think this is always kind of a weird thing because when the Phillies and the Astros are playing towards the end of the year, like I think when the Phillies were trying to get in the playoffs, I think they clinched against the Astros in Houston. I don't think we would ever seen this matchup again this season, but here we are. And I think when you take a look at these two teams, both extremely hot heading to this point, only one combined loss between them, and that was back in the Atlanta series for the Phillies. And they've both been really hot. They both had a battle back a few times. And I think the difference between these two teams in the series is who's going to go cold first. And I think if the Astros bats were to get colder, I think it would have less of an impact on them than if the Phillies bats go cold because the Phillies lineup, they have a lot of guys that if they're cold, they're going to be really bad and they're going to really hurt your team. Just a lot of strikeout or bust type guys. But the Astros, they have a lot of contact guys in that lineup and they're built really, really like all around. And I think the Phillies, they have that kind of bat go boom type lineup. They've been hyping it up pretty much the entire season. And it's done wonders for them in the playoffs. I mean, Rhys Hoskins played really well. Bryce Harper had a few clutch moments and Kyle Schwarber, of course. But if that keeps up, then I could definitely see the Phillies winning this one. But I think just for that reason, just kind of trying to be safe and predict like who's going to go cold first. I think the Astros would come away with this one, and they're going to come into this one hungry as well because they've had that heartbreak. I mean, they had the 2017 championship, which is a tainted one amongst the common MLB fan. And then they had those two World Series losses back in 2019 and 2021 against NL East teams. And I think they're hungry to kind of get back into the win column in that World Series and have a championship that fans will actually take seriously for the Astros. And Dusty Baker, he's been in the World Series so many times to this point. I think he's hungry as well to get one this late into his career. I think the Astros will win this one.
Yeah, I mean, Dusty, I do feel for him. He's managed a lot of good teams and has deserved a ring. And I mean, it has done great with Houston. I mean, really stabilizing that franchise there over the last couple of years after AJ Hinch. Really, in my opinion, it's pretty similar in that I think that the they have a deeper rotation, the Astros, which may not matter as much with off days between 2 and 3 and 5 and 6. But they have a deeper rotation and a bit better of a back end of the bullpen. Although Hector Neris coming back to face the Phillies, that's going to be a lot of fun. Yeah, I mean, talk about you either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become a villain. Hector Neris has lived long enough to see himself become the villain in Philly. And, there was a lot of ups and downs in the Hector Neris era and a lot of really, really big downs in the Hector Neris era. But, compared to the rest of those awful, god awful bullpens that he was a part of, he was always a bright spot. So I don't have any, hatred towards him there. But it's going to be a lot of fun seeing him come back into the bank and play for a ring, against his former team. And a team that a lot of people thought should have possibly paid Hector Neris in the offseason. He got more than I kind of thought maybe he should have, but a lot of people did want to pay him. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of impact he has. But yeah, I mean, I do got to give the advantage in the bullpen and starting to the Astros. And then you look at the lineup is close. I mean, if you have Harper as hot as he is, Hoskins staying hot, Schwarber staying hot, if you have all those guys clicking at once for one more series, they just have to click all at once, then they can legitimately win this thing. Problem is going to be is if, everybody goes cold, but like Harper stays hot. They need all of their guys to remain staying hot, because in the wild card series, nobody was hot. They had I think it was maybe Vierling and Bohm, I think were the two guys that were hot and carried them through. They didn't get enough offense at all. Oh, and Segura. But they're going to need it to be like in the division series and the CS, in that they need their Schwarber, Hoskins, Harper to hit, Segura to hit, Castellanos to not swing out of his shoes at every pitch in the dirt and just make some kind of contact. I can't watch that guy's at bats, man. They're brutal. Whenever he makes contact, it's like the biggest surprise ever. But anyway, yeah, I mean, that's the key to the series right there. If the Phillies lineup is all clicking, then they have a shot. If not, then I just don't see them being able to get by the Astros pitching.
Yeah, and that's kind of the point that I was alluding to there. That Phillies lineup, it's talented from top to bottom. It's just a matter if they can stay at their peak performance for a 7-game series against a talented Astros team. Just because, the rotation, we've talked about it before, they're a talented bunch, and Justin Verlander leading it. He's had his struggles in the postseason. If those last, then this could be a quick series in the Phillies' favor. It's just a matter of if the Phillies can get to Verlander. I don't think they will, but if they can, it could go the other way. I could definitely see this going in the Phillies' direction, but I just don't think it lasts. I mean, so you mentioned the Cardinals series, just how many guys went cold, and the Phillies, they haven't been hot for this long, really all season until later on, kind of after the All-Star break. So we'll see if that does last.
It hasn't even just been all season. They haven't been this hot all decade, since 2011. That's what's so amazing about this run, just how out of nowhere it came. Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at kind of the way the pitching would work. Again, you have to take one of two in Houston. Have to. If you're going to give yourself a chance, you take one of two in Houston. The Phillies at Citizens Bank Park are undefeated this postseason and have the best playoff record, I believe, at home since 07 or 08. So, I think if you take one in Houston, there is a legitimate shot. I mean, because then you'll have Wheeler would probably be back for game 5, Nola for game 6, unless they flip it, try and do something on a short rest there. But yeah, I mean, I think that they have a shot. They have a shot. I still think it's probably Astros in 6 is my guess right now. But compared to 3 weeks ago, where I would have said, you're dreaming if you think this is even a matchup, the Phillies, I do think can hang with these guys. So that'll be something that's interesting to watch. And now I do want to ask you here, because I've been thinking about this a lot because there's a lot of these memories from this postseason that are just going to rank up there for me as my all-time favorite Phillies moments. For you, watching, the Mets in the playoffs in the past, what have been some of your favorite playoff moments for your team?
Wow. This is going to be a tough one. I mean, the Mets haven't been in the playoffs for so long and definitely haven't made as many deep runs as the Phillies have. But I mean, just seeing them in the playoffs this year, it's going to rank up pretty highly despite the result. Definitely seeing, I mean, definitely not for very long, but game one of the World Series, just seeing that atmosphere, just the Mets making it back. It was such a rare occurrence for them to be there. No one thought they would be there. That's ranking pretty highly for me. Just those first moments before Eduardo Escobar, not Eduardo Escobar, Alcides Escobar kind of opened up this series in the wrong foot in the Mets' favor. But probably that entire Dodgers series, Mets Dodgers that year, because I remember I was still freshman in high school, I think, when they made that run, and all those Dodgers games, especially in LA, extremely late. Try my best to stay up as much as I can, but watching Daniel Murphy, just that entire series, just torch the Dodgers pitching staff, which was one of the best in baseball at that time. It was incredible to see as a young me, and I mean, him hitting that home run, Game 5, Zach Greinke, probably highlight moment for me. And then sweeping the Cubs that year to make it to the World Series. Really, that entire year in 2015 was just a fever dream because that entire second half, the Mets were the comeback kids. They were the Phillies because their offense was completely inept heading into the trade deadline. They got Yoenis Cespedes. They got a few other guys to go along with that, and they just went off from there. And it was definitely peak life for me because the Jets were playing really well at that point too. So it was a fun little sports stretch. And I always call it my the highlight of my sports life because the Mets went to the World Series and the Jets went 10-6 and didn't even make the playoffs. That's the bar I have as a sports fan.
Muted, but yeah, I mean that's definitely some memories right there. I'm actually looking as you were talking back over. I'm trying to find the playoff stats for those guys. And I'm kind of in shock that that was the Mets team that did that. I guess I didn't really remember. I remember the Daniel Murphy stretch where, God, the NLCS, he went 9 for 17 with 4 homers. So he had 529 with 4 homers. I mean, I guess Curtis Granderson. Yeah. I mean, what a weird team, man. I forgot about that. I mean, I remember that they went to the World Series, but then I kind of just think, okay, yeah, DeGrom, Syndergaard, whatever. But then I look at the lineup and I'm like, it was Travis d'Arnaud, Lucas Duda, Daniel Murphy, Wilmer Flores, Michael Kadire, Juan Lagares, Curtis Granderson. Man, I mean, that, as improbable as the Phillies run has been, I don't understand how that team won 90 games and then went to the World Series with that lineup, but that must have been a fever dream. Although that was a fun rotation because you guys had DeGrom, of course, the Dark Knight, Matt Harvey, and Thor. So fun pitching staff at least there. But yeah, I mean, what a time that must have been. And actually, I'll give you, before I give you my moment, I'll give you a chance to respond to that.
Yeah, no, you kind of hit the nail on the head right there. And you talk about the teams the Phillies beat on their run to get here, beating the Dodgers, who had always been a constant playoff threat at that time, and then the Cubs, who would eventually make the World Series and win it the next year. It was improbable, and the rotation, it was a once in a lifetime thing. It was hyped up for kind of the years to come because there was a young staff. They were supposed to be that amazing staff together because that was the year that Zach Wheeler was on Tommy John rest or recovery. And he was supposed to come back and join them the year after and only ended up to do it for the rival team. And then you had Steven Matz, who was on the come up, and Bartolo Colon, both in the bullpen during that run. So it was a talented staff and really deserved a lot better than what they ended up getting. But two of the members on that staff may get a ring by the time this is all over.
Yeah, I mean that's what's so amazing about all this. But yeah, I mean, so I'm thinking back now, and a lot of my memories are like, I remember the moment that they won the series in '08. And '08 was really the first year that I can kind of remember. Like that's the first sports moment I remember in my life, really. Um, Obviously that whole run after that to 2011 was fun. And I remember sitting there and just not believing when the Phillies lost to the Cardinals in 2011 after that amazing year, and seeing Howard go down with the injury. I think, looking back though, because I'm older now and able to appreciate it, what will go down as my favorite, probably Phillies moment. I mean, of course, hopefully, they'll win the World Series or whatever. The Harper homer, man. I mean, that's going to go down as probably one of my favorite Philly sports moments, period. I mean, up there with the Eagles, even winning the Super Bowl. I mean, it was just so like, I remember texting, I forget which group chat, if it was Sports Night or another or a Philly one that I have, but I remember texting before his at bat, and I said, if Harper hits one out here, he deserves the keys to the city. And then sure enough, after a long at bat where he battled to hit that pitch, I mean, on the outside corner to go opposite field there, on a day when I didn't think the ball was going to get out. I mean, it was kind of a chilly, rainy day in Philly. It was magical. I mean, you look at the videos, you see the Moneyball video with the music, man. It is just, that music, it hits different. I don't know who wrote that music, but I was saying I want that video played at my funeral. Like I straight up do. Like it was just, it's a masterpiece. I mean, the crowd shots in there and everything. It's just incredible. So I mean that was just, that was the moment when you're just like, oh my God, like this is real. Like this is happening. Like I think part of me kind of, especially after they went down in that game on Sunday, was kind of like, they're going to go back to San Diego and blow this. I feel like the magic is going to run out and like, this is where it ends. But man, Bryce Harper, I mean, it was just incredible. I mean, I was at a loss for words.
Yeah, that music really does get you in your feels just with I mean, especially that video. I mean, I saw it all over Twitter and like other social media platforms, but yeah, that was definitely an insane thing. And I think we had just gotten out of a sports night meeting for prep, like when that happened. And I'll shout out Anthony Desher. I think we were walking out of the meeting and he's like running all over the place, like outside. And like I asked him like what happened. It's like, oh my God, this actually just happened to me. Phillies might actually go to the World Series. Like that's insane. And then of course me and Jacob CHERIS driving to Wendy's trying to figure out the rest of the results. But yeah, it was quite the hit.
Of course, and shout out Jacob Cheris, fan of the pod, as always, fan of the duo. Miss him very much. Hope our guy is doing well back at the State College. There, our resident Nats correspondent of the podcast. Hoping the Phillies can keep the legacy going of NL East teams beating the Astros, but maybe next year it'll be Mets Astros or something. But I want to give you a chance to kind of, I know you probably got a lot of it out of your system, but rant about what the Mets, what do you think that they need to do this offseason?
Yeah, I mean, like we've had time to kind of get it out of our system. It's been a few weeks since that loss happened. I definitely threw a few things in the apartment once that loss happened because it was a one hit game. Like it was kind of coming for quite some time. And I talked about it earlier in the podcast. Like this team's going to look a lot different from now until opening day next year. And I think there's so much potential for the Mets to go out and sign a big name, whether it is Aaron Judge, whether it's Trey Turner, someone like that to really help bolster this team because we see it with just how good the Dodgers and Braves are. There's still work to be done, and especially with the rotation, DeGrom could be leaving, so there might have to be a big name that you get out there, whether it's a trade for Shohei Ohtani or something like that. But there is work that has to be done. There's a lot of players that need to be re-signed, and It's going to be a lot tougher next year because this Mets team, as painful as that ending was, it really was such a great season. There's a lot of great memories in there. I mean, it's tough to have 100+ win season and come away with a sour feeling about it, but that's what happened. And there was a lot of historical moments, and it's going to be tough for a lot of those players to repeat the seasons they had. I mean, Jeff McNeil winning the batting crown, it's going to be tough to repeat that. Pete Alonso finishing towards the top of the RBI category. Francisco Lindor probably having the best season of his career. Like, there's a lot that's going to be changed, and whether it's relying on the talent you have in the minors, which you have experience with from Binghamton, or whether it's going out of the market, maybe a little both. Like, there's still work that needs to be done with this team to get where your team is at right now.
Shout out my Rumble Ponies, our Rumble Ponies now, of course, great Penn State connections there. Got to see, of course, Mark Vientos, Brett Beatty. Going to be interesting to see what role they play next year. Would have been interesting to see if they were given a bit bigger of a role down the stretch, what might have been. And there was a lot of what ifs from this season. I know one of the, by the way, of course, you were the one that was talking about the what if show on Com Radio that you guys do. And I had read one of the greatest what ifs in this season for the Phillies is if they fired Girardi last offseason, Rob Thompson is not the manager of this team. If Rob Thompson is not the manager of this team, I don't know what happens. So shout out the Phillies for not doing that and firing Girardi at the perfect time and all that. I'm sure Ken Rosenthal is still hearing it about his article that he wrote about how it would not save the Phillies of their problems. But, you go back to that Mets team. I was actually looking, I think it's MLB Trade Rumors put out the arbitration estimates for all the players. So right now, last year's season ended at $282 million, so the highest payroll in the league for the Mets. This year, this offseason, already just a bit under 238 million. So already over the luxury tax and pretty high. So you figure they got about 50 million in spending room-ish if they're going to get back to the same payroll level. So it'll be interesting. I mean, because if you add DeGrom on, a contract that's like Scherzer around 40 million, then I don't know how much they're going to spend. So maybe they are better off and adding a couple different pieces instead of that. But they will need to address the rotation if there is no DeGrom, just because it's a bit up and down. Carlos Carrasco getting older. Bassett was good, but he'll be on the final year of his contract next year. No idea what's up with Tyler McGill. I'm assuming he still exists, but I have not heard from him in a long time. So, yeah, I mean, there's going to be a lot of interesting things to adjust there. And they're in that weird transition where they've got a couple of really high-end good prospects that are kind of going to backfill the roster, since the roster is a bit on the older side, I guess you would say. I mean, Eduardo Escobar is going to be 34. Mark Canha is going to be 34. Starling Marte is 34. And then obviously Scherzer is, up there as well. So kind of that mix of older and younger. But I mean, they're going to be, I think they're going to be fine next year. Maybe not a 100-something win baseball team, but surely in the playoffs, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully they make those necessary moves, and we'll see. It should be a fun offseason, and I'm sure there could be a podcast coming in the near future kind of talking more about that. But I think for now, that is going to wrap things up on this edition of the Top Prospects, the return of the Top Prospects, and we'll see if Chris's Phillies can come away after the Fall Classic with a World Series championship and a parade to follow. But for Chris Lemma making his return, I'm Logan Varandas, and we'll see you next time.
Hey everybody, thank you for tuning into this edition of Penn State Sports Night. We hope you liked that segment.
And we're sure there's other Penn State Sports Night segments that you are going to love as well. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more content.
And check us out on social media for updates and behind the scenes clips and pics. Follow us on Twitter at PSSN TV and on Instagram at PSU Sports Night to keep up with all the action.
For all of us here at the Belisari Media Center, we are
Penn State Sports Night.